This is E&P Reports, a vodcast from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcast, digital, and all forms of news publishing.
And greetings once again, Mike Linder, publisher, E&P Magazine. As always, I start off by boring the heck out of you with housekeeping. Listening to us on whatever podcast platform you like, please follow us. Watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button below me. Hit the bell to the right. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Kyle Hopkins, welcome to the program. We're talking to you, I assume, in Anchorage, Alaska. Is that right, sir?
Yes, I'm in Anchorage.
I wanted to let you know I was talking to you in the green room before the interview. We don't have a green room or anything. That I had worked there in 2008 as a consultant. I did stay at the Captain Cook. Where else do you stay? 4 years ago, the WIC Communications had me work with Scylla. I still stayed at the Captain Cook. So I know where you guys are. I love it up there, but I do hate that to get back, you got to take that midnight flight to Minneapolis. I used to always remember trying to get back to the States.
It's no fun getting anywhere from here, for sure.
I can tell you that. We have you here for two reasons, Kyle. I'm only going to have 30 or 40 minutes of your time. But there are two things I want to discuss with you. First of all, your background, the Pulitzer Prize winning work you've done in Anchorage. And I know you did it with a great team there, and how you came up with that amazing series, and thanks to ProPublica's support as well, Lawless, which kind of put a focus on the many different, I guess you call them villages, indigenous tribes, just that have no law, or at least no police force of record, which means no justice, right? And you did an amazing piece with that. And as I was unpacking it and reading about it, a lot of it had to do with data journalism, right? All the different databases you guys had to look at in order to piece together the story.
Yeah, I mean, we created really simple. I mean, one thing that was a barrier for us and that really helped having a partnership with ProPublica was, we didn't have any data. We're small enough, we still are, that we don't have kind of dedicated data journalists. And so I at least was always a little leery of trying to do data-driven projects because it's so easy to get that wrong.
Of course.
You go about it wrong, you draw the wrong conclusions, and then that's no good. So with kind of the confidence of knowing that we had ProPublica's folks looking over our shoulder and helping us figure out how to go about that type of work, we created some databases that were really simple, just very kind of basic, just a real basic accounting of public services in Alaska. And I don't think we found anything that was a surprise to people in villages, but the idea was to show, just to kind of, to prove to the world what's going on, right? Just because no one had really done it before. So the idea was all right, we're once and for all, we're just gonna we're gonna prove that this disparity exists. So
you do this amazing piece, which I loved, and we did report on, and we've actually reported on ProPublica's support. And then Tom McCarthy, the director of the famous movie Spotlight about the Boston Globe and all that and more, you kind of hook up with him. So this actual topic becomes kind of, I guess that's the fabric of the TV show now that's pretty famous, Alaska Daily, with and you're one of the executive producers. And that second thing I want to chat with you about is how that is putting a spotlight, if I could use that term, on the state of local journalism. How today it's not the big fat lazy operations of the past, right? We're all operating on shoestring budgets. We're trying to do our jobs, and I understand that they kind of embedded themselves, the writers, with you, and you kind of helped them understand. I mean, I know that your offices aren't exactly in a strip mall, but it kind of looks that way, isn't there? I look at it. You got a real estate agency on one side of you, and you're on the other, right now.
Yeah.
In Anchorage.
Yeah. No. Tom spent a lot of time in Alaska. He came. Let me drive him around South Central, which is, Anchorage and kind of around there. He came up with me. He went on a reporting trip with me to Utqiagvik for some stories I was working on, some cold case reporting. So we kind of went a lot of places together before the series was written. And there was the bit, I think it's in the pilot where Hillary Swank's character, she rolls up to the newsroom and she's like, "This isn't the newsroom, it's this other building." That came from Tom Googling Anchorage Daily News and seeing what used to be our building, which was, it sounds like probably the building that you visited, which was super
when
nice.
I was there, it was huge.
It had pillars and it had like a big First Amendment, it just was pretty baller.
The advertising department then had like 2 receptionists. We were back in the good old days when everybody
there were
was
librarians. That was like, I started with newspapers, right? Like I started right as the roller coaster was about to like go down. And so I walked in this, that's the Anchorage Daily News I started in. And then, but the one that I showed him was the one that we're in now, which it really, it's not quite a strip mall, but it's nothing fancy.
Well, we're going to get to our commercial in a moment, but I wanted to ask one third topic, and this is very important to me, near and dear, and I hope you can do me this favor. We are the magazine of record of the news publishing industry. We've been around since 1884. Wikipedia says we're the Bible. Is there a chance I can get a copy of the magazine into one of the scenes? Could Hillary Swank be holding it? Is it too late now? Has everything been shot? Can you Photoshop it in for me, use AI or something, or is that not going to be happening, sir?
They've filmed everything. So if there's a season 2, I'm happy to bring a copy.
She mentions Morning Joe in the pilot. At least she could have had an editor and publisher next. Anyway, we'll get to our interview in the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is exclusively sponsored by Blocks Digital, formerly Town News. Even though the name has changed, their commitment to the media industry is as strong as ever. Blocks Digital is now even better positioned to deliver integrated solutions like content management, audience development, advertising revenue, video management, and more. Join the over 2,000 news publishers worldwide that power their ongoing digital transformation with Blocks Digital, serving over 141 million monthly users who view over 6.5 billion pages of content each year. You can trust Blocks Digital to empower you, to connect you at scale with the community you need to reach. Blocks Digital, formerly Town News, now reimagined to help meet the news publishing challenges of tomorrow and beyond. Learn more at blocksdigital.com.
Kyle, let's first talk about Lawless and your journey on uncovering this story. First of all, this was not news to you being an Alaskan, correct? You knew the trial. How do you get brought up in that culture knowing that there's really completely 2 different cultures there? There are human beings that have laws, there are human beings that have justice, and there are human beings that may not even have any form of law enforcement and anything goes? Is this, or did it slowly evolve that people started to learn this was a challenge?
Well, I was born in Alaska. I grew up mostly in Alaska. I lived in some pretty small communities. And so, how things worked were not necessarily a surprise, but there were a few things that surprised me. One was that when we started asking really basic questions, because we wanted to say something. We knew that there was a 2-tiered. I think it's inarguable that there's a 2-tiered justice system. That if you live in Anchorage, where I am now, and you're either accused of a crime or you're a survivor of a crime, the way the experience you have with the justice system is totally different than if you are off the road system, in a community of like 500 people that you can only get to by a plane. Just logistics alone make it that, there's a lot of barriers to delivering, equitable service there. And so, we knew that there was this 2-tiered system and wanted to illustrate it. And what surprised me was like how little information there was, because really basic questions we couldn't answer. Like, that first story that talked a lot about the lack of law enforcement of any kind in communities, that came in part from just realizing that the state of nobody was keeping track. Even the agencies that were their job is to keep track, they didn't know. No one had any idea. No one was there was like kind of no communication between these kind of small.
These were like unknown people. They just weren't even on the radar, right? And anything goes in that culture because there is no law. Am I kind of yes, no?
Well, one example I would say it's just a really different experience, and there are many reasons for it. But like we did a follow-up story maybe a year or so later, where I went to one of the communities that in that series, there's a story that the headline was like The Last Police Officer, and it was about this community of Russian Mission, where they hadn't had their last police officer was a guy who had testified at this congressional committee and he'd said all the things that we were saying in Lawless. I mean, this was like, in 2005, he said all the things. He was like, look, this is, I'm trying to do police work here. I don't have any support. There's, I'm paying for my own, I'm paying the heating bill. I'm paying the gasoline for my snow machine and stuff. We're kind of forgotten about as law enforcement out here. He took his own life a little bit after that. And so, wow. I'd gone to that community to write about just that community, and went back about a year after Lawless. And there was this experience that we wrote about where there was a guy, I interviewed a guy who he'd been ambushed. He'd come off the river with his friends, and he was walking up to that same community, and someone shot him with a shotgun, and he still had like all the shotgun pellets in him and stuff. And for months, nobody arrested the guy who shot him for months. Like he was charged, back at the courthouse with attempted murder, but the guy who shot him, they would just run into each other, like at the store and stuff, because there was no one to come arrest him. Or like when the troopers would fly in, they would look for the guy, but they would look for the shooter, but the shooter would just go off into the woods, and, he'd just wait out the troopers, and the troopers would leave. And because there was no law enforcement in that town, you had the attempted murderer and the victim. They just would, they'd be like sitting next to each other in the church pews and stuff. And so, like that experience was something that we felt
the other reporting you did, which I found fascinating, is some of the law enforcement that does exist are law offenders. You managed to uncover that some people who are police officers commit crimes or had committed crimes, and were they really trustworthy at doing their job? It seems like we're back to the days of the Wild West, where even before there was a territory, and Judge Roy Bean or whatever. I think as an American society, we tend to not realize we're not as sophisticated as we are. And it's not just Alaska. I mean, Yakima Herald, I'm not if you're familiar with the piece they did on the problems with the indigenous populations there. And they worked with Microsoft funds to do the same thing you did, database journalism, find out how many women's death has never, ever been on these reservations has ever been reported. That spotlight alone is fascinating. So my next question to you is, here you were, this wonderful piece, 2020 Pulitzer Prize. How did you and Tom McCarthy how did the show happen? Did they come to you because of Lawless, or did they come to you because they wanted to do a piece about a newspaper in the middle, way up in Alaska? How did this all come together?
Sure. Well, it was a new experience for me because we had, we started publishing those stories, and, publishing with ProPublica, you get more eyeballs on, more people were reading our work than normal, because usually we're writing for Alaskans, and suddenly we had this kind of national audience thanks to ProPublica. And so, as happens, I guess, sometimes we started to get inquiries about rights. People would say like, hey, we're interested in the rights to these stories. And of course the newspaper owned the rights, right? And so I started to kind of get a little antsy because, I knew that probably the rights were going to be sold. And I was like, okay, how can we make sure that this gets in the hands of someone? First of all, I didn't think anything would ever be made, because I just assumed that nothing gets made. but I thought, well, how can we ensure that this is handled well? Who would be an ideal person to have these rights? And then so when Tom McCarthy expressed interest, I like a lot of journalists, I was a big fan of Spotlight. I just really liked, the quiet moments, and I liked how I just felt like it showed kind of an appreciation for like what the work actually is like. And so I adored that movie. So I was excited to talk to him, and I didn't think you'd actually be interested. And then we just kind of kept talking, and then one day he said, he'd mentioned that he'd been thinking for a while about how he wanted to do a series about, just kind of that dug into like a smaller town journalism, and that he was interested in kind of telling that story in, alongside some of the stories that we were doing, and some of the ongoing reporting that I was kind of working on for another project. So it just evolved over like a year, and I just felt like we were lucky to have him interested.
Well, this is a very opportune time for this show to be out, as you likely know, and I know you're way up there, but I'm sure you keep your ear to the ground. We're desperately trying to save local journalism. There's a million different ways. A perfect storm has happened in our industry. You don't report, you don't do deep dives into the show, but you pretty much show the world that we as journalists are focused on trying to do our jobs in a different world now. We don't have all that automatic money from classifieds we used to have. Big tech is taking 70% of our revenues right off the table of local advertising. There goes the insert business. I can go on and on and on. And you do an amazing job in this show of telling that story at the same time as you're digging into, the deeper issues with. Did he understand this going in? Did he say to you, yeah, I get it. You guys are no longer these big, massive operations. Did he get it? I mean, or did you have to educate them? Or were you the key guy that said, no, wait a second, this is different than the days when I was sitting in a big office and I had people taking messages for me and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was pretty far down that path. He'd been talking to like Margaret Sullivan, and he had kind of a lot. He knew a lot when he came to the table. And so, our experience was more just, all right, here's how our specific newsroom works. And here's like the nuts and bolts of how this particular small newsroom works. And, things that I wanted to communicate, because I'd seen, I would see them in movies about journalism or television about journalism. And I'd think, wow, it must be nice to just little things, like someone would fly off to go do an interview. And I think that must be nice. Nobody has money. Like there's no money for that. There's no money for anything, obviously. Right. So like the kind of bare bones element of it, or just not being able, like there's a line about how LexisNexis was no longer available in the newsroom because we got caught with everyone using the same profile.
I remember.
Like that kind of thing. Like that actually happened to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because to tell you our story, my daughter got hooked on a TV show, which I doubt if you ever heard of, maybe the Gilmore Girls, which was like 10 or 12 years ago, right? And then the young character in that wants to be a journalist, Yale graduate, right, with honors, and she's sitting like in the lobby of the, a suburban paper outside of Hartford, and there's like a staff of 50 around her, and I'm laughing, and my wife, helps publish the magazine. This is not the world today. I mean, that we're in today. So how much is your newsroom now at the Anchorage Daily News? When they built this, I mean, because I remember I read your piece you wrote for the Seattle Times. I mean, I know you do a lot of writing where you were kind of giving the background, and you said they came and studied you. They wanted to see what to wear, what the candy in the background. When you watched the set they set up for you, were you in Vancouver when they were filming this as executive producer? Did you head down there? And
I was there for when they were shooting the pilot, and the pilot was shot, most of it was shot way before the rest of it. And so I was there for about a week or so of the pilot.
Did you have this out-of-body experience going, wow, this is my newsroom, I can't believe I'm walking through this, or what?
Well, I went down there with my editor, and it really was like, it's down in, it's in Vancouver, and it's in this, this place where they make a lot of sets. And so it's like underground, and you walk in there, and the newsroom itself was really familiar. Like they had really nailed it. And it was kind of a combination of like our current newsroom and even a little bit older, like the old newsroom where there's just stacks of paper everywhere. And it kind of, but it felt super familiar to the point where, because we were still working too. So to the point where like we were kind of sitting down, like in the little, in like the meeting room where they have the meetings in the show, like we were sitting in there and doing work and stuff, because it was just, it was like, it just felt like an actual newsroom.
Fascinating. When did you meet some of the characters? Did you coax them along? Were you used as a dialogue coach? Were you ever asked, did Hillary Swank or them come up to you and say, okay, is this how they asked the question? Is this how they asked the question? How much were they invested? I mean, I know Hillary Swank's the big star, but some of those stars are actually Alaskan citizens, right? There were some that were, there are people there that there are local actors that were brought in as well. How much did they want to be authentic, if I may ask the question?
Sure. No, I was surprised. Like we got a lot of calls. They would, you would get a call like on a Sunday, and it would be like from Craig Frank, who plays Austin on the show, and he'd be talking about, okay, I've got this scene we're gonna shoot tomorrow, and I'm interviewing this person, and we would just kind of walk through like, well, here's what I'd be thinking about, like during that interview, or like what I want to make sure to walk away with at the end of that interview, and how that conversation might go, and like what I would be writing down, we talked to, I would get those calls every once in a while they were filming. Like one of the actors would call and say, okay, I've got the scene. I'm at the press conference, and we would talk about like, well, here's kind of what you're thinking about and stuff. So they did a lot of homework. Jeff Perry actually spent quite a bit of time in Anchorage. Like he plays the editor. He came up, he just hung out for a while. He was in the newsroom for a while.
Because he's pretty famous, Jeff Perry. I mean,
that dude like hung out. He soaked it up for a while. It was really interesting.
And he just wanted to see did he attend your editorial meetings to see how you're trying to, assign stories here and there? The one where they do the Alaska, okay, I think that they brought Alaska in true light. Because I remember I've been there. I understand. I have friends that are still there, where the fair was a big deal. I mean, I know it's a big deal there. It's huge. It's enormous. Was that part of it? Did they get to see that that the coverage is still a little bit of a down home, and then it's also the enterprise and investigative journalism as well?
We talked about that a lot in the writers' room, because I was in the writers' room for maybe like 2 months. Kind of at the beginning, yeah. And so we would talk about like,
before you go on, what's the dynamic of that? Are they all how many are in the room, and they all writing different scripts? Or are they all there just milk it? What is a writer's room like?
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea what to expect. I just showed up, and
and what is it like?
It was a group of like, I would say like 6 to 10 people at any given time, and they were kind of veteran TV writers, and then there were us. Then there was like 3 kind of pods of people. There were the veteran TV writers who just knew how to write television. There were the journalists, like myself and Mike Resendez, who was part of that spotlight team, and then Alaskans, who were just there to kind of,
Really?
Yeah, there was. It was really interesting, because it was a lot of, at the beginning, just kind of like, all right, what are we trying to say, and like what is going to happen this season, and then I was real focused on just kind of super nitty gritty stuff. Like, all right, like I'm one of my first assignments at the ADN was to write about the giant cabbage, like who won the giant cabbage. That was one of my first bylines for them, was like the giant cabbage thing, right? So like we were talking about like, well, here's like, if you're a young. So the conversation would be like, if you're a young reporter, what might you be asked to report on? So you just kind of tell these stories, and like you tell like 20 stories, and one of them ends up, being the thing that they.
That must have flipped you out, that the cabbage made it into. Was that part of that? They hadn't even written that. That was episode 5, I think. They hadn't even written that script yet. And you're telling them about the cabbage? Because I know some people are going, what cabbage? What are we talking about? I never watched the show. That's a fascinating scene, because it's a young cub reporter who actually dives into it and asks some really cool questions about how they're grown and meets the family. Did that happen to you, or did they just kind of augment that? I'm curious.
I mean, there's, I was assigned a big cabbage story, and I remember like, interviewing this girl. Like, I remember like being really interested in the idea that the girl who grew the cabbage weighed less than the cabbage. And I was like, all right, that's my lead to that story is, the cabbage is bigger than she is. I thought I was just,
you didn't have a crush on her like he does in the episode.
No, she was like a kid. And
okay, no, all right.
And but there was no, I mean, and that's where the TV part comes in, right? There was no like, domestic terrorism element to that, just somebody grew a cabbage.
All right, so now we obviously have a couple more episodes coming out. Finally, we're on this, and you already know what happens. Don't spoil alert anyone, because this is going to play before. Has the bug bitten you? Do you enjoy this idea of helping the fiction world understand our world? Because you've lived it. I mean, for many, many years. You actually, I didn't even talk about your bio. Those of you, I'll have it, of course, on the landing page. You contribute to the LA Times, right? You also work in television. You do television. You have a background there as well. You're writing for a lot of different sources. I know you're going, I'm not that important, but your name's around. Do you enjoy the fact that you are helping that fictional world spotlight our world? Will you help in the second season if it comes around again?
I don't, I don't know. Like, it was really interesting and fun to kind of see just how that creative process works. And I also found it kind of stressful because it's, I'm thinking about how are Alaskans going to view this thing, right? And you feel
Well, of
just, and
course.
journalists, like, you could just picture like every journalist being like, you could see the tweets coming,
Okay, well,
and so
let me just hold you,
that was
because back
stressful.
when I was a kid, young, I was a disc jockey and then a program director, and WKRP Cincinnati was on, and I was throwing stuff at the TV set going, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is not the way the world, but that's different from this. You were nervous that you were being the voice of our industry to the minds of these actors and these writers. And okay, what feedback did you get? What tweets? What did you get?
Oh, I think it was pretty well received by journalists. I think most people, people recognize that there's concessions to make for like it's just a different medium, right?
Well, of course.
Um, but the feedback has been mostly pretty good from
How about the
journalists.
Alaska feedback, the locals who know you? I mean, when you're walking down the street, they say, "Hey, Kyle, that was a great episode last night." You're
Uh,
getting
I mean, it's been, it's on hiatus, right? And so, and I've been working, like I'm working on stories right now. Like we're publishing a couple stories tomorrow, as we speak. And so like, it's more most interactions I have are mostly, they're just like, I'm kind of back in the grind, and people have kind of forgotten about the TV stuff for now. That'll change. I think it'll change when it starts airing again. But like, we all have everyone's just concerned with what's happening. So there's like a lot of just kind of news drama happening in Alaska. So that's like,
sure.
that's what we're focused on.
There was a movie called A Game Changer or whatever that did a bit about Sarah Palin in Alaska, and I remember the opening scene. She's walking without even a guard through the fair and gets a phone. People are walking up, "Hey, Gov," and she's going, "Hey, that is Alaska, right?" I mean, it's just
Oh, sure.
it's
Yeah, definitely.
it's everybody knows each other. I mean, it's so you will this be, is this in your way a little sometimes? Are you trying to like have a logical conversation? I'm sorry, I'm doing investigative journalism on your brain, but here you
Yeah.
are doing a story and someone wants to change a topic like I am and talk about, no, what does Hillary Swank really look like? I mean, without makeup and that kind. Does that ever get in your way, or is it just, okay, we love you, Kyle, thanks for helping us get into the world like this?
Um, I don't know that anyone loves me. I think it's, I mean, because I'm back doing basic reporting, and so I think people, if anything, I think people. Okay, you're having like a contentious conversation with some public official or their spokesperson, right? And
Yes.
so the dynamic, there is like this now, there's a little bit of a dynamic where they can now pull out of their pocket and be like, well, is this gonna be on the TV show, I guess, and so like, sometimes people get me with that a little bit,
Does your
but
publisher get mad at you, your owner? Does he ever look at you and go, "Come on, Kyle, you got us in a lot of trouble here. I liked it better the old way," or is everybody pretty happy with? I mean, we know it's Alaska Daily and you are the Anchorage Daily News. They didn't use your name, but it's still kind of AD. I mean, do you ever have anybody in the office go, "Kyle, what did you do to us?" Or
yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think people are, they're like, what's happening? Like, what is this? And is this us or is this not? And so, and you know how reporters are, right? Like everyone's got a lot of questions and opinions, and they're kind
yeah.
of digging into it and stuff. And so, I mean, I would say it has been, I definitely feel the weight of like trying to get it right or trying to help everyone get it right. I mean, that part is a little intense.
Well, as the publisher of a magazine that's supposedly one of the voices of the industry, I'm going to blow you some smoke. You did get it right. I watched that show and I'm proud that people are seeing a story about us telling stories. You see, I think it boils down to that. If you ever get into the reporting we're doing on trying to help local journalism, and we work a lot with Report for America and America's newspapers and all, the philanthropy going on. The truth is we are part of a democratic society. We are a fiber of the community. Without us, communities languish. I'm sure you know, there's been many small papers that have shut down in Alaska, and I'm sure you know that corruption comes and goes. It's just nice to have that spotlight on us, that how important we are, because not only do they tell the story of the story that they're doing, they're also telling the story of the reporting. And so whether that's great acting, great writing, or your input, congratulations. In my opinion, it's helping us right now at a good time. Maybe you disagree, but I think it's always showing a good light about journalism. So thank you. I
appreciate that. Thanks for saying that. I think it comes from a place, and I think this is where Tom came from, and this is where my hope was, this was my motivation, at least, was this idea of feeling like, if people saw how we did our work, when people don't trust us or they kind of assume the worst, I've always felt like if they actually saw how we put together, if they saw how the sausage was made in our industry, they would be, they would have confidence in it, right? Because I'm proud of how we arrive at, just this past week, all the conversations I've been having with editors are like, is this fair? How do we know this? How do we source this? We're cutting stuff that, we're cutting good lines from stories because we can't, we just don't feel like we have it. And so, I've always been proud of how we put these stories together. And I've always felt if people saw that, then they would trust us more.
Well, Kyle Hopkins, I guess your official title is Special Projects Editor. Is it still that?
Yeah, I'm a reporter, essentially, yeah.
Anchorage Daily News. You still list yourself as a freelancer for the LA Times. You kind of nodded your head, but your pieces will show up in a few papers. You're also still listed as a digital director at TV2. Do you still work there a little bit as well?
No, that must be, I need to update something because I did work, after the paper went bankrupt, I worked for a few years for the local television station, and then I came back to the paper. So I was working for like the NBC affiliate for a while here in Anchorage before I came back to the newspaper.
Here's another story. I wish we had another 30 minutes. What's it like to jump from, if it leads journalism, back to, here I am being judgmental. Please excuse me. I'm sure the stuff you did on TV was amazing, but I ran a TV station and it's a whole different news operation.
You know what? I got really defensive about the TV reporters because when I came back to the paper, because you know how like papers think of TV journalism, right? At least in small markets. And I was like, man, dude, you have no idea. Like, imagine getting your assignment at like 10 a.m. and that it's due at 2 and you got to get visuals.
You got to get
I have a lot of respect for how hard that job is hard.
It is very hard. Now, remember, I was in the days of radio. So, I started as a disc jockey and I ran radio news operations with teams of 8. That's when you did like 12 stories a day. It was all just a cassette recorder and just lots of audio, much easier than running a news operation at a TV station. I'll give you that. But you must love being back under the masthead now and working at the paper.
Yeah, I feel like it's my natural habitat for sure. I never got used to shaving. I never got used to looking presentable. Like it was a relief to kind of.
Well, you look pretty good for this interview as well. Kyle Hopkins, Anchorage Daily News, and of course, you should be on the show for many reasons. Executive producer of ABC's Alaska Daily. I should say, for the producer who set up this program, you can also stream it on Hulu. How's that for a quick commercial as well? Starring Hillary Swank. We appreciate your time, Kyle. We hope you'll stay in touch with us, and more importantly, keep up the good fight up there. We appreciate it.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for making time for me.